folks, welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. So, as 81 million Americans, or at least that's what we're told, are still in meltdown mode, we're going to shift gears and talk about food supplies and crop conditions, because the country has been experiencing a lot of drought and a lot of heat, and some of the crops just aren't faring very well. And so I want to talk about that. Even here, we went about a month here at the homestead without any kind of precipitation at all. We finally got some yesterday morning and the evening before, and while it wasn't a complete soaker, it was certainly a relief and needed amount of moisture that we got. And the biggest benefit, at least in the immediate, is that today is just an absolutely beautiful Ozark day. I mean, we actually have normal temperatures, and we haven't had that in quite a while. So we're very thankful for that. But there's certain places in the country that just aren't doing very good. And so we want to talk about that here in just a minute. I wanted to mention another prepper meeting that's coming up. Now, this isn't one of my meetings, okay? I mentioned to you the ones that we have and host, but there's another one being held here in the Ozarks also. It's in Salem, Missouri. For those of you that are in the Salem, Missouri area, this meeting is July 7th at 6 p.m. and it's being held at the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Salem. Now, the church itself isn't putting it on, but the people that are putting it on, they're using the church facility. So if you're interested in attending, I'm going to try to be there. The way things look right now, I'll be able to attend unless, something happens. And, that does from time to time. But July 7th at 6 p.m. in Salem, Missouri at the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And they're doing kind of a prepper seminar there. So that would be something that you'd want to attend if you're in the area. And for those of you that have meetings like that and you would like for me to mention them on my channel, shoot me an email, give me at least a couple of weeks heads up, and I'll do my very best to get them out there for you so people can hear about your meetings, because that's one of the biggest goals of this channel, is just to bring people together and help people create community. It's a very needed thing, especially in the times that we are living in. So let's talk about the crop reports that are starting to come out. Things have been in the ground, planted long enough that we're starting to see the results of shortages and of droughts and of heat. And while some of the country is doing okay, I mean, I can't get on here and honestly say the whole country is experiencing apocalyptic levels of, crop failures. It's not like that. There are certainly areas of the country that are doing good, but there's areas that are doing really bad. And we have to put this into perspective. We're dealing with shortages on an international level because of wars, because of people, certain countries, choosing to not export or limit their exports. We're dealing with several countries that are also dealing with drought conditions and excessive heat. And then we're dealing with shortages of certain items that are very necessary in the farming industry, chemicals, fertilizers, fuel, parts, and even labor. So when you put it all in a big picture and you start to see areas have really poor crop conditions, it's definitely going to exacerbate the whole system. Again, this isn't a complete nationwide crop failure, but we're seeing some areas that are just doing pretty poor. And then I'm also receiving emails from people that are commenting on what's going on, what they're seeing in their area. And they're seeing corn that's nowhere near the height that it normally is by this time of the year, or fields that look pretty dead, whether it be because of drought or they're used to putting fertilizers on it and it's not happening. Kansas is the state that seems to be doing pretty bad right now. Of course, we all remember a couple of weeks ago all the cattle that were falling over dead in Kansas. Their wheat report is pretty poor right now. We're looking at like 40%, at least that's what the USDA is reporting, that around 40% of Kansas wheat, their winter wheat harvest is either poor or just completely bad condition. I mean, it's just not in good shape at all. And that's pretty significant when you consider that Kansas amounts to about a quarter of the winter wheat production here in the United States. So it's a state that produces a lot of wheat, and their wheat conditions are pretty poor this year because of just the heat and the drought. Texas and New Mexico, they're dealing with a lot of the same problems. Texas is getting hit pretty hard this year when it comes to crop conditions. They're just across the board when it comes to the areas that grow crops. They're doing really bad, and most of it's due to the drought. Texas is experiencing excessive and extreme drought conditions throughout a large portion of the state, and this is not good because Texas is a major farming state, and even the areas that are producing cattle, they're probably going to be hurting, especially come later on this year, because the hay production in Kansas or in Texas is just absolutely awful. We're looking at serious failures in a lot of areas in hay production. Some of it's the drought that's causing it, and then there's also the factor of the lack of fertilizer that we're seeing all across the country. And so it's something that I've been talking about for a while on here. Come this fall, when farmers start stocking up, and wrapping up their hay for the year so that they have enough to keep their cattle alive for the winter time, things are going to start getting pretty hard because there's just not going to be enough hay. There's not enough that's being produced. Part of it, again, it's because of drought and heat. And the other part is the vast majority of hay farmers, they use fertilizer. And I have heard locally and all across the nation, whether through personal contacts or through the news, that there's just not enough fertilizer for these farmers to put on their hay, and they're expecting numbers of hay reduction numbers of 30 to 40% simply because of the lack of fertilizer. And that's not factoring in areas that are dealing with excessive heat and drought. And so come this winter, a lot of these farmers are going to have to be making some hard choices. How much of their herd to keep, or how much of it to let go and send to the butcher because they don't have the hay to keep them alive, or maybe they can't afford the hay because the prices have skyrocketed, which is what many farmers, I've talked to several farmers here locally, and that's what they believe is going to happen. That's what they're all planning for, and I've talked to at least 3 or 4 beef cattle farmers that are telling me that they're already trying to do the math and figure out how many of their cattle that they need to send off to the slaughterhouse because they're just not going to be able to afford to keep their herds alive all winter long. And this is going to have some long-term repercussions to the whole system. You and I, the consumer, and I understand some of you are farmers, big farmers, but I'm saying the consumers, they're seeing what's happening right now. And we're hearing reports of shortages, and we're seeing the food prices increase, and we're seeing the shelves empty. And while it's uncomfortable for certain, in the very least, you have to understand that the food that you're eating right now, the vast majority of it was last year's food. And last year was a decent year for farming. It wasn't, a bumper crop, and it wasn't everything perfect, but it was a decent year. This year has gotten a lot worse. And so the food that's being produced this year, a lot of it's going to hit your shelves and your table next year, which means next year's going to be really bad. And that's what everyone is believing, that 2023 and 2024, when it comes to food, it's going to be significantly worse than what we're dealing with right now. So that's another reason to keep prepping. I mean, you go to the store and you're seeing the high prices of food. I assure you, those food prices are going to get much higher. So even though, your dollar isn't going as far when you're trying to stock up right now, you should still do as much as you possibly can, even if you have to cut back in other areas, because come next year, yeah, it's gonna get probably pretty bad. Another thing that's a hurting farming right now is the lack of chemicals. So we've been talking about fertilizer, talking about fuel shortages, which is drastically increasing the cost of farming. I've heard from several farmers that personally and online that they're saying that just the fuel costs alone is making it very difficult. Like, they're not even sure that they're going to even make a profit this year. You know, some of these farmers are saying that a lot of people are probably just going to break even. So you've got those factors, but then the other thing is just the lack of chemicals. Now, I don't like chemical fertilizers. We don't use any kind of chemical fertilizers here on our farm. We're completely organic. We're not certified. You don't need to be certified, but we are completely organic because I don't like it. But the fact is, for this country and this world to produce the amount of food that the system is used to having and is built around, unfortunately, those chemical fertilizers are necessary to produce that, and there's a shortage of those also. And so these farmers aren't able to put the pesticides and chemical fertilizers and herbicides and things like that on their crops that they're used to. And so they're expecting less return. They're expecting a smaller harvest because the increase in pests, the increase in weeds, and there's a possibility, and I'm no expert in this, so don't take it my word for this, but in just my research, there are those that believe because the bugs and the weeds have been so used to having those chemicals put on them, if we take them away very abruptly, we could see an explosion of the bugs, an explosion of the weeds, whereas, you know, for instance, us here, we don't use them. We're able to manage them in other ways on a yearly basis. So if you take them away in an abrupt way in areas that's what they're used to, it could potentially cause an explosion of those pests and parasites and bugs and weeds, which is in the end going to hurt the harvest. So folks, I know I get a lot of people, all your doomsday videos. Trust me, this isn't doomsday yet, folks. Here in another year or so, you might be seeing some more real doomsday videos from me. But right now, this isn't doomsday. This is warning you. This is letting you know that things don't look real great down the road. Again, there are certain areas that are certainly doing pretty good. But there's areas down south, there's areas up north also, areas in Illinois and Minnesota and even in the Dakotas. There's certain areas that aren't doing that great when it comes to their crop productions this year. So you put it all together with everything else that's going on, it doesn't look very good. And so I encourage you to take the time that you have, because you may not have a whole lot of time left to start stocking up. And again, this video is just focused on crop production. We're not even talking about the increase, you all know about it, all the increased riots and violence, all the other problems that's happening in our system. It's literally a powder keg, folks. We're living, it's like we're sitting on top of a powder keg, and you've got about 50 different things sitting there lighting matches right next to it. At some point, you just got to think that at some point it seems to be inevitable that one of those matches are going to light that keg off. So do what you can now by stocking up, by getting your gardens as strong and as solid as you can. Many of you live in areas that you're able to plant a second crops of things. And for instance, here we're probably about 30 days away from really getting serious about our second garden. And so if you're in areas that you can do that, be planning for that. There's a lot of crops that do better when you plant them towards the end of the summer and then they harvest them in the fall. So do your research on that. Make sure you're producing as much as you can, preserving all that you're producing. Don't let it go to waste. Make sure you're figured out how you're going to produce it, where you're canning it, freezing it, drying it, cold storing it, whatever it is, because come next year, you're really going to appreciate it, because I have a feeling that there's going to be a lot of items that's going to be nearly impossible to afford unless you're just some of the upper wealthy. Folks, get your houses in order. Prepare yourselves mentally, physically, and spiritually. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next video.